Hello there, welcome to saberduelgaming, where we always take the high ground. Now, you will know if you've watched many of my videos that I am a huge fan of 1v1 fighting games. I also think these games peaked quite a while ago. I'm a huge fan of the Street Fighter 2 series of games, and I've reviewed a load of them. I've also reviewed a number of Mortal Kombat and more recently Killer Instinct. But one franchise I've never really touched on is the Virtua Fighter series, and perhaps the most famous of these is Virtua Fighter 2. Virtua Fighter 2 in the arcades in the mid-90s was a massive success, and the port over onto the Sega Saturn was just as popular. With its immersive, three-dimensional graphics and replays, it was an absolute hit. Unfortunately, we're looking at Virtua Fighter 2 on the Sega Mega Drive, and boy, this is a stark contrast. Look, Virtua Fighter 2 on the arcade didn't have the fatalities that Mortal Kombat did. The characters weren't as interesting or as relatable as the ones you would see in Street Fighter 2. It didn't have the fantastical supers and specials that you would see in a lot of the other games. It relied on the fact that it had beautiful, immersive 3D graphics, fantastic replays, and of course the ring out as a unique way of winning a match. And most of that was able to be ported onto the Sega Saturn, but by God, why they tried to wedge this into the Sega Mega Drive, I'll never know. The menu screen and character screen tried to give you the same feel that the arcade game did, and that's probably where the game peaks. Once the game actually loads in, instantly 3D is gone, like completely. Even the graphics themselves don't come close to giving you any sort of 3D feel. Instead, the graphics feel like a massive step back from Street Fighter 2, and I don't mean the later Street Fighter 2s, I mean Street Fighter 2. So without the novelties that made the game successful, the 3D graphics, the fancy replays, you were left with a very, very basic 1v1 fighting game. Now let's try and look at the positives and what is there. First of all, one of the things that made this game a little bit different to some of its contemporary 1v1 fighting game rivals was the fact that you could win by knocking someone out of the ring. It's not really a ring, but the staged area. You could give them a kick towards the edge, they would fall out, and you've won that round. Often the game will go to a time's up, and then it suddenly gives you a few more bonus seconds to get a bonus hit or win. It's a little bit strange. Time's up, surely the time should just be up, so I'm not sure if that's a positive or not. I suppose it does make it different, but different isn't always better. The Virtua Fighter games never had original or particularly interesting characters in the same way that the other games we've talked about did. However, it didn't matter too much because of how cool the graphics were, but in this version of the game, the generic boring look for the characters really stands out. I'm looking here and going, that's just a crap Shang Tsung. That one over there is just a lame Chun-Li ripoff, and the other one, that's Shinobi. I would really love to try and give you some more positives, but I can't think of any. The backgrounds are boring, generic, rubbish really. There's nothing particularly interesting to speak about audio-wise. There's not really much to talk about in any positive light. There's a few good moves, but nothing that would really stick in the mind afterwards, and certainly nothing that's particularly original. But having said all that, how was the game received when it actually first came out? Maybe I'm being a little bit critical on this thing. Or maybe I'm not. Gamer Rankings gave it 44%. It got 3 out of 5 stars by Computer and Video Games, but only 1.5 out of 5 by All Games. So it's fair to say there really isn't a great deal of positive love for this game, and there wasn't when it was released. I'd love to give you more of an idea as to how it was viewed when it was released, but there really isn't a lot of information out there. In fact, quite frankly, I actually found a number of articles talking about it being as something of a forgotten version of the game. Maybe just something that the creators wanted to pretend never happened. It's a little bit harsh because, quite frankly, the Sega Mega Drive never stood a chance of being able to recreate the arcade game or the Sega Saturn version of the game. It wasn't something that the console was capable of. I do think the console was capable of a far better version than this. Hell, the console ran versions of Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat to very good effect. So there's certainly no reason they couldn't have created a 2D version of the game that was still a more than competent fighter. They just didn't bother, and that is a shame. What I will say as a slight positive towards how this game may have been viewed is that I did find a fair few people reference how they actually do have fond memories of this game. I think a lot of them commented that those memories don't stand up today, but maybe back then it was just a game they had fun playing, and that's got to stand for something, right? There is also something to be said for ports of a game on a lower console. I remember really wanting to play Mortal Kombat, but I didn't own any of the bigger consoles I could play it on, so I tried my best to enjoy playing it on the original Game Boy, and I convinced myself that I was having a lot of fun, but the reality was, I was kind of gaslighting myself. There's a good chance that a lot of people have done that with this game. They really wanted to play the game they'd seen in the arcades, and this was the nearest to it they could get, so they made sure they enjoyed it, whether the game was fun or not. That said, what do I know? Maybe people really did enjoy playing this game. Maybe the simplistic nature, the lack of fireballs and fancy special moves genuinely appealed to people. But how does it stand up to modern scrutiny? Well, poorly. I'm not going to compare this to modern games, quite frankly that feels like bullying. But even comparing it to games that came out before it, the earliest Street Fighter 2 games, it isn't even close. This would have aged poorly if I'd reviewed it back in the late 90s. Hell, it would have aged poorly if I'd reviewed it at the time it was released, but quite frankly, there were far better 1v1 fighting games out years before this game was released. Since then, we've seen so many different 2D fighting games. It's just not close. Quite frankly, this is a game that I'm shocked they've re-released it on the Nintendo Switch, on the PlayStation 2, as this version. Quite frankly, it's aged terribly, and it didn't start out that great to begin with. There may be some fun to be had here for the nostalgia value if you played this game back when it was first released and you actually have positive memories, but beyond that, I don't see it. Virtua Fighter 2 is a game that when I first saw that it was there on the Switch Mega Drive emulator, I was really keen to play it. I'd never played it before on the Mega Drive, and I was deadly disappointed. Giving it a rating of 3 out of 10 seems massively low for any game that technically works, but quite frankly, I think it's totally appropriate. I couldn't dream of giving it more. It only got as high as it did because of the novelty of the basic game mechanics. But what do you think? Have I been too critical of this? Do you have fond memories of it? Do comment below and let me know. And until next time, as always, take the high ground.